Previously, a very concerned Keelan realized that several of the group were clearly affected by the hag's magic, as they seemed to have some type of spell on them preventing them from talking about the conversation they'd heard during the night between the hag and Oz. Tarnak pulled Taria aside for a bit of a talk about her issues with the group killing people who were trying to kill them. Taria wasn't impressed with his argument. Her father had always told her stories about the adventures he'd been on, but had emphasized that he'd never killed anyone, and she wanted to be like that. It took conviction, and she thought the fact that the group kept killing people meant they lacked conviction in their ideals. He pointed out that there might be a day in the future where she would need to protect with the flail instead of the shield. While he hoped that day didn't come anytime soon, he was worried it was going to come, and she was going to have to decide what she would do when that day came. Taria reluctantly agreed to bite her tongue a bit more, but she made it clear that she didn't want to have to interact with Keelan just then. So, of course, that's when Keelan rushed over and all but dragged the two of them into the forest for a conversation. He told them that he was worried that the hag had cast magic of some type on their companions and him to keep them from talking about something that had happened a few nights before. He told them he'd told Sava because he had concerns it would affect him too. Then he tried to tell them what he'd heard, only to not be able to do so. Tarnak tried to read Keelan's mind, but he wasn't able to push through the hag's magic. All he could read from it was that Keelan knew he was being prevented from talking, but he couldn't hear any thoughts about what Keelan had actually seen and heard. Keelan asked the two of them to promise not to run off and do anything hasty. Then he cast Speak with Animals on Tornak so he could talk to Sava. Sava told Tornak that Keelan saw the hag come into their camp at night and give Osru a dagger. She didn't tell him to use the dagger on the group. There was something about her sister in the dagger? Maybe? Then the hag's spell kicked in, and Sava couldn't tell him anything else either. Tornak quickly turned and filled Taria in. They agreed not to try to take the dagger from Oz, at least not until they knew more, as they had concerns about how it might affect Oz if they did. Back at the camp, Sean wrote letters that she then burned, while Tornak wrote letters that he never seemed to mail off. Everyone then went to sleep for the night except Taria, who stayed up all night, keeping watch for any signs of the hag. The next morning, a postwriter came by, and the group picked up a newspaper. The group was mentioned in it, albeit not by name or description, but the Valenta family's interestingly timed donations to the temple were covered in an article. There was also information about the growing tensions between the Praetors and the temple, as well as a traveling carnival that Tornak seemed very eager to see. Around midday, they started seeing blue crystals coming out of the ground, small at first and then larger ones. Eventually, they came out of the woods and saw the small city of Brilridge ahead of them, sparkling with clusters of blue crystals. Keelan knew their alchemical properties. Tornak tried to eat one. Shad suggested that they make their donation to the temple the last thing they did in the city, as it would be bound to draw attention. The others didn't disagree. The group made their way properly into the city, heading towards the city's Wyvern's Claw. They got a suite for the night, pleased to hear that there were hot springs there. Taria was clearly exhausted, and Zaya made a few comments about her staying up all night journaling. Taria channeled Sean, of all people, doing a fairly good job at it, to Zaya's surprise. In the aftermath, she commented to Oz that she'd picked up on the fact that Taria tended to mirror people. Then the group hit up the job board to see what was available. Keelan and Tornak worked together to create an entry for the lore ledger. The less said about it, the better. Then the group split up, because that always went so well. Taria went upstairs to take a nap. Keelan, Sean, and Tornak went to buy alchemical supplies and look into acquiring mithril. Oz stocked up on cooking supplies, while Zaya followed behind him and eavesdropped on people. While doing so, she picked up on the fact that people in the city were very wary about the temple and its ongoing conflict with the Praetors. There was a lot of discontent. Once they were done with their shopping, Keelan, Sean, and Tornak headed to the temple to scope it out. While there, they quickly noticed that there was a crowd gathering. Keelan noticed a Praetor in a building nearby, clearly watching from a distance. Tornak listened to the thoughts of the crowd, realizing that it was quickly turning into a mob. They were upset about an illuminator who they thought was bastardizing their religion, among other things. Sean started pulling Keelan backwards away from the crowd, as she could tell it had the potential to get ugly. As she was doing so, a young half-orc man stood up and started yelling, pushing it into a riot as people started to pour into the temple. And that is where we left off.